If you are an automaker that wants to build and sell a sporty performance electric vehicle, you now have a big problem, and it's right in front of you in Soultronic Orange. This is the 2025 Hyundai Ioniq 5N, and I don't believe that it's hyperbole to say that this thing is an absolute game changer for an electric vehicle. We've seen that any automaker can make an electric car go fast, but there's been a big problem. They just can't capture the soul of a gasoline engine. Hyundai's N division has figured out how to do it with this car. It wasn't BMW, it wasn't Tesla, and it certainly wasn't Porsche. It was the folks over in South Korea who decided that to make an electric car more fun like a gas car, why don't we just make it behave like a gas car? This might be the most unique electric vehicle on sale today, possibly ever, and I can't wait to show it to you. Let's check it out. So I'm going to briefly start with a walk around of what makes this an Ioniq 5N. We've seen a few vehicles from the N division now, at least here in the United States. It started with the Veloster. We also briefly had the Kona N, and we do still have the Elantra N. They all start with a big heaping dose of attitude. We've got this lower kind of body kit here with these orange accents. Those are always going to be orange no matter which of the exterior colors you choose. It blends in a little bit with this paint, which I originally thought kind of looked more red, but they call it Soultronic Orange. It is quite a lot, but don't worry, they do have more discreet paints available. They also have this gorgeous matte blue. It's very similar to the performance blue that you get on the Elantra N, but it is matte for the Ioniq 5N. We've got a much more aggressive front end than what you're going to find on the standard Ioniq 5. This whole car is 2 inches wider than the standard Ioniq. It sits about 0.8 of an inch lower as well, and it is a little bit wider thanks to that front diffuser, and there is a rear diffuser as well. We've got these gorgeous 21-inch wheels with this beautiful pattern. We do have more orange there on the brake caliper. That is a massive 15.75-inch front rotor, and we do have 14.2-inch rotors at the wheel at the rear. We do also have the pop-out door handles that most Ioniq 5s have. And then here you can really see why this car is wider. We've got the wheel arch extensions with the vent here that, as you can see, goes through. I can stick my fingers through there. And then here at the back, there is that rear diffuser that I mentioned, really giving this thing a race car appearance. I loved how the Ioniq 5 looked already, but this N model just has so much attitude. It really reminds me of a modern day interpretation of a Lancia Delta Integrale. And Hyundai's N transformation is not just limited to the exterior. The interior is pretty radically different from what you'll find in a standard Ioniq 5. We've got the N seats. You know, a lot of the N cars have had bucket seats like this. The N logo actually lights up at night just like a BMW M seat. We've got a little bit of this baby blue here on the stitching. These seats might not look that comfortable, but they really are. They have this nice suede here in the middle. They are actually heated and ventilated, although to save weight, which is a little bit silly on a nearly 5,000-pound EV, we do have manual seats here. They are not power adjustable as they would be on a top Ioniq 5. We also have lots of checkered flag elements because, you know, the N's are made for the racetrack. And as soon as you step in here, you're going to think, oh wow, this is very different from a regular Ioniq 5. That sort of open design here in the center console. They have the sliding center console in the regular Ioniq 5. That's gone. We now have this fixed unit right here. We have our wireless charger right here, USBs right here, another USB and a 12-volt outlet down here. And then we do have a little bit of open space. You can actually twist these cup holders out of the way, and then when you need to deploy them, you just click that and they will spin out. We do have this nice moving armrest as well that slides up with a little bit of storage in there. Now let's go ahead and start it up. We do have a start button on all Ioniq 5s. They do not operate like something like a Tesla or a Rivian where you just kind of get in and you don't have to push a button. Now the screens themselves should look familiar. if you have been in an Ioniq 5, but there are obviously a lot of N touches, mainly what you can do with the steering wheel here. So this is very similar to something that you'd find in a BMW M car. We actually have paddle shifters, the reason for which we will talk about as we get out on the road. They can control the brake regen as they typically do in a standard Ioniq 5, or they can control the NE shift, which we'll see when we get it out on the road. Now, right now, I have it showing kind of the normal gauge cluster, but there is a way that you can kind of change that. If I go into not under display, under cluster, there are different cluster themes, and you can have them change depending on your drive mode. So you do get a little drive mode selector up here in Performance Blue. So right now that's what your sport gauges are going to look like. That is what your eco mode is going to look like, and normal. And then there is a fourth style, I should say, when you go ahead and click this N button. Now you have a much more performance-oriented gauge, and there is a lot that you can display here. You have a G meter. You can have basic stuff like your current trip or after charging. You can have your tire pressures. You can also see where your power is being distributed, and you can even have a lap timer. And then, as you can see, it shows front and rear motor temperature and battery temperature, important things to monitor when you are driving spiritedly. And there are just so many cool things that we can do here. First of all, being the sounds. So if we go to sound, and then we go to N-Active Sound Plus. This is one of the things that is so different in the Ioniq 5N versus anything else. You get 3 different sounds that you can make this car. Ignition is going to kind of sound like an internal combustion engine car, and there's different ways to play around with this that we'll talk about when we get it out on the road. But now, if I hit the throttle in this car, actually I have to push this one to make it into this mode. Now it sounds like I am revving a gasoline engine car. So that's interesting. I mean, other electric vehicles do sounds though, but you'll see how this is a little bit different when we get it out on the road. We've got Evolution. So this one is supposed to sound like a futuristic electric car. It's supposed to be a little bit like their RN22E concept car, which I actually got to drive. So let's hear if it does indeed sound like that. Oh. That is a pretty cool sound. And then we have Supersonic, that it says this one is inspired by a supersonic fighter jet. All right, that one sounds different as well. So really interesting ways that you can kind of play around with this car using these buttons right here. This one is basically like your M button in a BMW. You cycle between Custom 1 and Custom 2. Using this button, you can set up what those do here. I want to show you. You have different settings for your motor. Eco, normal, sport, sport plus. Steering has different modes: normal, sport, sport plus. Suspension, normal, sport, sport plus. The ELSD has normal, sport, sport plus. ESC, normal, sport, and off. And then you do have those sounds there that you can have saved to those buttons. And then this one is going to switch between making this thing accelerate like an EV and making it accelerate like a gasoline engine car. We'll see that in just a little bit when we get it out on the road. Now, in addition to all of the stuff that you can play with on this screen, we also have this N mode here. We've got a lap timer. It'll show us our acceleration and brake pedals. We have N torque distribution. I'll talk about all of this stuff as we get it out on the road. Same thing with the N battery stuff. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the road. You can have your G meter, launch control, different performance options here. There's so much in here. It's almost overwhelming. It will take you weeks, if not months, to kind of get used to this, but I imagine that owners who buy this car are going to love getting used to all of this stuff, and eventually they will find out how to perfectly execute all of it. And I do love that despite this vehicle being heavily geared towards performance, it is still an Ioniq 5. We get a ton of leg room back here. I love actually looking at the backs of these sports seats. I like that they gave us a second N logo here on the back just to give people back here something to gaze at. We do have rear air back here. We also have USB ports down here. And then unlike a lot of vehicles in this segment, I can actually slide and recline these seats, and they do go up extremely far, as I'm going to show you. Look at the difference between how far you can have this up if you want to get more trunk space versus legroom. Maybe you have a car seat back here and you don't need the legroom. This still does the family tasks extremely well. It's a similar story back here in the trunk where we have a little over 26 cubic feet, 59 cubic feet if we fold down the seats. You do lose the front trunk that the Ioniq 5 has, which is fine on the N model. You really couldn't fit much more than a charging cable in there, and if you are worried about that, you do have a little bit storage in here for a charging cable. The one thing that I will say that I wish Hyundai did was put a way to release these seats from back here in the trunk. You are going to have to walk over to the back and pull this if you are going to want to drop down the seats. All right, now it's time to find out how the first all-electric Hyundai N car feels out on the road. I've been so excited to try this, and we're going to start off with an obvious one. We're going to use the N launch control. That's going to take us from the normal 601 horsepower to 641 horsepower. Crazy amount of power in just kind of a regular crossover. 545 pound-feet of torque normally, but it gets 568 when you use the launch control function. So I have it all set up, road level grip high, and all I have to do is release the brake. Oh my goodness. Oh, that slaps you down. Oh, that was 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds. Okay, so it does the whole electric accelerating off the line thing quick. But I think that is not even close to the #1 story about this car. In fact, I don't even think it ranks in the top 10 of how quick this car is. The big thing that's important about this car is what it can do when you turn on the sounds. So I showed you how you can play around with these on the inside. So this is going to be the ignition sound. So this is the one that's supposed to sound like a gasoline car, like an Elantra N. Ready? All right. That's pretty cool, but still not the most important thing that this car can do, because there are other electric performance vehicles that I've driven that have crazy sounds like that. The AMG EQS had sounds like that, and I thought it was nice, but I didn't think it was that impressive. So what I'm now going to do is go ahead and push this button, and now it's shifting! This is the thing that Hyundai has done that is completely rewriting the game on performance electric vehicles. This is, I want to make sure I get the name right because we've just got so many darn names here. This is the NE shift function. E shift. N for N, E shift. So it's electric shift. This is simulating, because it's not real, an 8-speed dual clutch automatic transmission. And I apologize, we are not in the ignition mode. Now, we are in the ignition mode that's supposed to sound like the engine. Yes. It's literally... It does the fake cracks and pops! That is an exhaust overrun. We've got the 10 speakers in here and 2 on the outside. 8 speakers inside, 2 on the outside. And it is literally using only the rear speakers to make it sound like there is an exhaust overrun coming from the back of the car. Pop, 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 pop. You hear that? It's faking it. And it's doing an amazing job of it. And it isn't just like pretending to be, fake facsimile of a transmission. If I let it rev too far, ooh, it cuts the power on me as if I had hit the actual rev limiter in a car. And then, it just handles so well. It has that beautiful balance. We do have adaptive suspension. I like keeping it on the softest mode. Even in the softest mode, or even in the stiffest mode, it doesn't ride as firm as something like the Elantra N. That car really just beats you up. This is pretty soft, pretty compliant, way stiffer than kind of a standard Ioniq 5, but it's really not too bad. And then if I push this button again, now I can go to the Evolution sound. So this is supposed to sound like the RM development car. I actually got to drive one of these. Oh, now that is a completely different noise from the gas engine. And I think it sounds really cool with the gears. You can do it with or without. Oh, completely different if you want that kind of futuristic feel like you're driving an actual spaceship. And that's not the only one. We do have one more. It's going to take me a minute to find it here on the screen. If I go to setup, this is all a little bit complicated. You can get pretty close to all of this set up in your screen, but you can only really have 2 of these sounds ready. I'm going to use the last one, which is called Supersonic. Not my favorite. This is probably my least favorite of the 3. It's supposed to sound like a jet turbine. I'm going to let you listen to it for a second. It literally has like an explosion on the shifts. And you can customize each of these. You can make them quieter or louder if you like the sounds, but not necessarily the sound effects. So the explosion on this, the cracks and pops of the fake exhaust on the ignition mode. If you like these, but don't love those sound effects, you can just turn those off and just have the overall noise without the crazy things on the shifts. And of course, you can also make it silent. I can go ahead and put it into ignition. I can turn off the gears. And now, even though we have an engine, it'll just be one continuous gear like an EV would have, like almost like a CVT. I don't necessarily like pairing that specific sound to not having gears because I think it just sounds a lot more natural when it has gears, but you can do that if you want. Now, I did mention at the beginning that we get 641 horsepower when you use the launch control, but there is another way to do it. You can push this button that says NGB. It stands for N-Grin Boost. Now, I'm going to go ahead and push that. Oh! And basically that's going to give you that max 641 horsepower and the little torque boost as well for 10 seconds at a time, and then it requires a cooldown. Now, what you might have noticed is that there's like a slight delay on the sound. It kind of pauses the sound for a little bit, and if you were in the gear mode, it's going to take you out of that because it's going to want to produce maximum acceleration, and you can't really do that while you're kind of also trying to fake the gears. So it's a little bit weird how that works, but I do understand why it needs to do that in order to get the maximum level of speed. But you can kind of think of this as your push to pass button. If I take it out of everything and I put it into eco mode, now it's completely silent. I've got, no gears, no nothing. And this mode really dials back everything. The throttle becomes so lackadaisical, it's almost comical. Okay. I had to get into the road. I really had to push the throttle there. And I need to get out in front of somebody. I'm going to slap my N-Grin boost and whoo, I'm off. It doesn't change any of the sound. It just gives me the max power when I need it, and I don't have to fiddle around with any of the other settings because there are, as you've seen, quite a lot of ways to customize this car. And I haven't even gotten to all of the other ways that you can drive this car spiritedly. There's the N drift optimizer. You can basically turn this into a rear wheel drive drift missile. There's the torque kick drift, which is essentially a clutch kick. You know how like in a Porsche or a Lamborghini, you can pull the paddles, put it in neutral, click the clutch, and then reapply the clutch, and you can kind of kick the car out and get it to step out into a drift. There's the N torque distribution. I can make this a front wheel drive car. I can make this a rear wheel drive car. car. It's almost like a Subaru WRX STI, but with like infinite levels of customization. The eLSD has 11 different levels of setting. It's almost overwhelming. I can see why they decided to toss all of this in. This was their first attempt at doing this kind of sporty electric vehicle. They wanted to show what was technically possible. But I think maybe as you keep coming out with these and other brands try to copy it, you're going to want to maybe dial it back a little bit, because I do think if you go way deep into the settings, you can probably find the perfect way to set this car up. And I found a couple of ways that I like. I like everything in sport when I click my N button, but I like the suspension in comfortable, and that's a pretty happy medium for me. But I think if you play around a little too much with it, you might actually find a way to kind of mess up the handling and make it a way that is kind of suboptimal. And that might work for Hyundai, a brand that is kind of new and upstart and wants to give owners kind of everything they want, but it wouldn't work for a company like BMW or Porsche, who, you know, want to tell you the best way to kind of set up the car. So there might be a little bit too much customization here. There's even different ways to prime the battery. They have this thing called N-Race, so you can either put it in endurance or sprint. So if you are going to take this to the track and you want max performance, you're going to want to put it in sprint if you're only doing like one fastest possible lap. Or if you want to preserve the battery, you can put it in endurance, and that's going to lower the battery temperature and all of that to make sure that you can do repeated laps. There's also a drag mode, which is going to give you the full power of the battery. And then there's also a track mode, which is going to, again, allow for better lapping and less battery degradation. Everything you could possibly think of, and 12 things that you couldn't even possibly think of, are all found here on the Ioniq 5N. They really have thought of everything, and they really have transformed the perception of what an electric performance car can be. If you're one of those people who's been complaining on the internet that an electric car will just never be as exciting as a gasoline engine one, and they'll have to rip your combustion engine from your cold, dead hands, I'm sorry. If this car doesn't get you excited, you're just a curmudgeon. It's as simple as that. This thing gives me the fizz, whether it's fake or not. And if you can't admit that this is a cool car, that's on you, and it's not Hyundai's fault. So at this point, you might be wondering about range, because I really didn't talk about it while we were out driving. I wanted to wait to talk about the elephant in the room, which is going to be the range. First of all, while other Ioniq 5 models now have the NACS connector because they're built in the United States and you can plug right into a Tesla station, this still has the old CCS connector. I'm guessing Hyundai will update this at some point with the NACS connector, but you can still charge on a supercharger if you're willing to use an adapter. And the Ioniq 5, even this N model, is still the 800 volt eGMP platform, meaning that you can charge at speeds of up to 238 kilowatts, which is really quick. That's going to get you from 10 to 80% battery in just 18 minutes. The only problem is these big 21-inch wheels that are really wide and really grippy, and the extra, width on the vehicle is going to hurt your range. The EPA only rates this car at 221 miles, and if there's any bad weather, if it's really cold, you might even do less than that. So that is definitely something to consider if you were looking to buy the Ioniq 5N. It does not have good range for an EV. I imagine that Hyundai will continue to improve this technology so that we can have performance like this, but also get closer to that 300-mile range estimate. But right now, you are not really getting both. You're kind of just getting one or the other. So that's going to wrap up our time with the 2025 Hyundai Ioniq 5N. As I mentioned while I was driving it, this thing is a game changer. If you are another automaker and you are trying to sell me on a performance electric vehicle, whether that's a crossover, a sedan, an actual supercar and it doesn't have sounds and gears and customization the way that this car has, I just don't want it. You need to be doing that like yesterday, not today, not tomorrow. This thing needs to be studied and copied because it completely changes the way that I think about a performance EV. Because we've seen they can all be fast. They can all do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. But what this thing does is it brings the emotional element to it. That is something that a Lucid Air Sapphire or a Tesla Model S Plaid just doesn't do at the moment. It just doesn't get the enthusiast that loves the sound of a burbly engine. And remember, this is just the start. This is the very first one. I got to imagine that Hyundai will make this sound even more real, even more natural. I've got to imagine that a company like Porsche or Volkswagen Group with billions of dollars at the helm can bring in sounds from their portfolio. Imagine an Alfa Romeo with the Busso V6. Imagine a Lamborghini supercar where you can choose to make it sound like an Aventador or a Murcielago or even a Mura, and you can actually change the electric motors to dial back the power so that it has the speed of a Mura, and then you can upgrade the next day to the speed of a Revuelto. Imagine if you could match the power profiles. The possibilities for what this car stands for are endless. This is just the beginning, and I honestly am so happy that at this point in my career, I've gotten to drive a car that I think is going to shape the future of motoring. That's how important this Ioniq 5N is. And we've got to wrap up by talking about the pricing, because I will admit, it is not exactly affordable at $66,200. You basically get everything on the Ioniq 5N. There's not like a lower trim level that has fewer options right now. And I get that that's a lot of money, especially if you're looking at a Ford Mustang Mach-E GT, which is only like $52,500. Even the Chevy Blazer SS, which produces similar power and performance as this, is a little bit cheaper at $62,590. That also gets a tax credit, as does the Mach-E GT, so pulling the price even lower than the Ioniq 5N, which does not get the credit because it's built in South Korea. I believe it still does if you lease it though, so maybe you can get a good deal on leasing it. And as we've seen, I hate to say it, but all of these electric vehicles have been depreciating super heavily. So just imagine that in like 2 years' time, you're able to pick one of these up for $35,000 or $40,000. Listen, I know that not everybody has the budget to afford a $60,000 car, but 35 or 40 grand in 2 or 3 years' time, this is going to be an outrageous deal. You're literally pulling supercar speeds. You're getting all of the sound, all of the emotion, and it's still a very practical car, as we saw. This is my favorite EV that is on sale right now. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But for a very first attempt at something that nobody else thought of, I really have to give Hyundai the most credit in the world. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Are you excited about the Ioniq 5N? Would you buy this over any other EV? Or are there still some, maybe a Tesla Model 3 Performance, maybe a Rivian or a Plaid or a Sapphire that get you a little bit more excited from their speed? I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you want to see more companies copy this formula? And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell to be alerted of our latest videos. And I'll see you next time.